Got a video here called Jordan Peterson Leaves Woke Students Speechless on Sex.
As a redeemed progressive, what is the key to empowering men in the Me Too age while maintaining healthy boundaries and strong behavioural expectations?
We've had relatively reliable birth control since 1960. Okay, that's not very long. And we underestimate the unbelievable technological triumph of birth control. It's the hydrogen bomb. It's the transistor. Like, it's a major league transformation in human interaction. Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay, we don't know exactly what to do about that. Okay, so the first idea in the 60s was, hell, let's party. And, you could see why. It's like the rules for not engaging in promiscuous sexual intercourse seemed to have vanished. So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say. That's not so good for kids.
That's one of the things I disagree with them on, the impact of birth control, the pill itself. I don't think the impact is as big as he may be thinking. I think culture had a far bigger impact. And as far as birth control, we're going towards an age of understanding how damaging and dangerous birth control is to women, and more women are getting off birth control. But I guarantee you, we already have the technology with abortions and Plan B in case there is an accidental pregnancy. Like, let's be real, birth control, at least in today's age, doesn't have the relevance it once did when it first came to market. There are alternatives for not having a baby today. And even if you made birth control illegal today, just as a test, and I place that importance on culture because it destroys the mentality around family, it destroys the mentality around kids, around long-term partnerships, around two families coming together. We've become so hedonistic and reduced the act of sex towards a simple pleasure. We have a reductionist mentality in society in general, dumbing down everything. Sex is just a handshake, like it was said in that one short from a girl. A woman who engaged in so much sex that she found it to not be intimate. It was the equivalent of shaking a hand. I mean, that's where culture is today. And you want to attack on the institution of marriage, you want to attack on child rearing and all that stuff. That's insane. We can't even get to that part of the conversation until we talk about people's relationships with sex and sexual pleasure and adult entertainment and the hypersexualization of society in general, how desensitized we've become to it. And then what had a larger impact? I don't know. It's debatable. Did the hippies culture, the psychedelic era, the love, sex, freedom, did that have a larger impact on society's viewpoints when it came to, on top of gynocracy and its effects on everything I listed before? Was that a bigger driver than the pill itself? I personally think culture has a more potent effect on women's reproduction than simply the pill. I don't think the pill was that revolutionary, to be honest. I think people were engaging in sex just as often as they were before the pill, just using other methods. I think this whole notion of sex, casual sex exploded post-pill is kind of nonsense.
AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later, and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. That was the rule. Now that isn't the rule. Okay, so what's the rule? Well, we're not having a conversation about the rule. We're waiting till someone does something that seems like it might be untoward, and then mobbing.
That was the rule, but nobody followed it back in the day, very rarely. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, easy story there. There's always been, quote, forbidden love before marriage, always.
And trying to extract the rule out that way. And it's not a very effective way of doing it. You want to decrease campus rape? That's easy. Get rid of alcohol. No one has that conversation.
Yep.
It's like I did my PhD work on alcohol. 50% of the people who are murdered are drunk, and 50% of the people who kill them are drunk. And almost all the date rape situations are consequences of excess intoxication. but yet there's a party culture on campuses and anything goes. And you also have this strange thing, especially on the radical left, which is unbelievably paradoxical, where absolutely every form of sexual expression imaginable is 100% permissible because sex is fine, but it's so dangerous.
Encouraged.
That while you're dancing with someone at a Princeton mixer, you have to ask them 2 or 3 times if it's okay for you to continue. And that's actually the case, by the way. I'm not making that up. It's like, well, both of those things can't be true. Now, what's happening, I think, on the Me Too end of things and the affirmative consent end of things is the old sexual taboos are reasserting themselves. The idea that we can extract sex out from emotional intimacy, and especially emotional intimacy, I would say, psychological intimacy, maybe even from long-term relationship, I don't believe it's a tenable idea. I don't think we can do it. And a lot of what we're seeing is the backlash against that. It's like, well, I feel used. Because one of the things that's happening on the really radical end of the anti-sexual abuse movement is the idea that, well, if you have intercourse with someone and then you regret it the next day, that's evidence that it wasn't consensual. Well, it is, in a sense, evidence that it wasn't consensual because it's evidence that you didn't bloody well think it through. It was good for last night, but it's not good for today. It's not very wise. The question is, well, what constitutes consent? And we need to have a very serious conversation about that. Like, under what circumstances is it acceptable to give consent? But
if you're drunk as a woman and you go to a party and you go upstairs with a guy and you have intercourse and then you regret it the next day that you consented. Everywhere else in the world, here in Eastern Europe, they would absolutely put the blame on the woman. Why did you go upstairs with them? Why did you go to a party? Why did you get drunk? Why did you make all these decisions in succession that led to that outcome that was negative for you overall because you regretted it the next morning? Here in the West, we place the blame on the man. We say it's his fault for inviting her upstairs. It's his fault for taking advantage because she was drinking. It's his fault for pushing for intercourse. Zero blame on the woman. We don't question the woman's decision. It's like we've regressed so much because the women's empowerment movement was all about giving them a choice, giving them power to make a decision and dealing with the consequences. We've removed that completely. It's absolutely insane how we've infantilized women on a societal level today when they can get drunk and not be held accountable for their actions, and a man still get blamed and be told that he was taking advantage of an adult human being just because they ingested a liquid. And you can't do that in reverse. If a man gets blackout drunk and a woman takes advantage of him, it's still his fault. She's not to blame for anything. How insane is this thinking? Only in the West could you possibly make this argument. In the rest of the world, they would place the blame on the individual. If you're a man and you got blackout drunk and a woman took advantage of you, you're a moron. You got drunk and you got taken advantage of, bro. Did she pick your pockets too and jack all your cash? That's your fault, stupid. Don't do that again. Very simple. Even here in the West, we say that. In the rest of the world, if a woman's walking around alone at night, something happens, or she goes to a party, gets taken advantage of because she drank too much, passed out somewhere, some of that blame has to be put on the woman for making the decision to get that plastered at a party, no friends around to look after, whatever. You put yourself in these positions, man. I don't want to go in a big city walking around some dark alleys at night where people are hanging around on the corner and expect not to get robbed, stabbed, shot up, whatever. It's common sense. But here in the West, it's like a taboo. How dare you victim blame? How dare you say it's her fault? She should be able to go to a party and do whatever she wants, and men shouldn't be pigs. Okay, that's fine. That's an ideal world you're talking about. We don't live in an ideal world. There's scumbags everywhere. I can't walk around at night with jewelry flashing everywhere, 6 dudes on the corner of a rough neighborhood, and not expect something to potentially happen. There's a high likelihood I'm going to get into an altercation and get beat down and robbed. That's the reality. I don't go, oh, it'd be nice if in an ideal world I could just walk around with bling and cash hanging out of my pockets in that 4 a.m. in the middle of the night in any neighborhood I feel like. That's ideal. That's nice, but that's not the reality. So why should you expect to live in an ideal world when it isn't? Yet we're treating society as ideal in the West when it's far from it.
We're not mature enough to have that conversation. We want it both ways. We want to be able to do whatever we want, with whoever we want, whenever we want, with no consequences, and we want there never to be any trouble about consent. It's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. I don't think that sex works very well outside of committed relationship. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. There's a strong proclivity across cultures for the enforcement, social enforcement of long-term monogamy. And there's reasons for that. And I think you deviate from that at your peril. So now, if you want to deviate from that, there's all sorts of reasons to do it. And I can understand why people are interested in adventure and all of that. But, my sense also as a clinician is, you only really get to try out about 5 people in your life. You have to make a decision pretty damn quick. Like between 20 and 30, there's a lot of things to get straight, and long-term mate is usually one of them. And most of the time, people should be more careful with their sexual behavior when they're young, especially when they're drunk, than they are. And I just think it's so interesting that all of the taboo reconstruction is coming from the radical left. It's not what you'd expect at all. You'd think it'd be the damn right-wing Christians complaining about, sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's the radical lefties. You have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be? You're supposed to be able to do a little bit of nonverbal reading, right? I mean, that's part of romance. You ever see a movie where the 2 people who are dating exchange consent notes? Like, that doesn't happen. So it's an unrealistic solution. But I think the real solution is that despite the fact that we have reliable birth control, we're going to have to relearn what the acceptable rules of propriety are with regards to sexual relationships. One of the things I often tell my young clients is don't do anything physically with anyone that you wouldn't talk to them about. Because if you're too damn embarrassed to talk about it, well, maybe it's a little premature in the relationship to actually do it. And then there's harm in it. There's emotional harm in it on both parties. There's the cheapening of both parties. So it's going to take us a long time to sort this out. Hopefully we can do it in a serious manner, and it won't be merely a matter of mobbing those who seem to have made an error.
Yeah, some of the comments say people in our age literally have sex before they talk to each other about their values. How that happens is completely beyond me. Then some dude says, I have to admit this was surgical precision level dialogue and it's spot on. I like to consider myself a progressive type, but this area, there is no question that the laissez-faire way in which young people treat sexuality these days does not seem to, by and large, lend to great results. When you have people using the term body count and it's in the 20s of partners and even more, that can't be good, can it? It devalues the whole thing in my eyes. I feel so bad for kids who are living in this extremely wicked generation. Yeah, the solution to this, unfortunately, is empowering women. And that means actual empowerment, teaching them to keep their legs closed, which the irony of the left would never let this happen. They feel like progressiveness in their eyes, advancement of gender norms, is the very thing that is devaluing women in the eyes of society and men in general. When you commodify your body, OFANS is the latest example, when you make it easy, accessible, and on top of that, you live in a hedonistic culture where people have absolutely no morals or values or character, no discipline, they will start to take advantage by reducing themselves. The reductionist idea that we live under is, how do I make money the fastest way possible, take advantage of men? How? Simping through the comments, simping through OFANS communities, get paid, get laid, zero consequences. I'll think about the future later when it comes one day. Right now, I just want money. I want things. I want adoration. I want attention, but I don't want to be responsible for anything. There should be no consequences to me. That's not how you empower women.